He was now king of Jadathra. This position was the first official step in proper conquest. The last 5 years of negotiation, presentation, diplomacy, and traveling across the galaxy had all led up to this moment. With the conquest of Jadathra, he now had the resources of a world that was loyal to him personally, a starting seed from which the rest of his conquest would spiral out from. Jadathra was chosen, both as a night world, and because it was nearly in the center of the territory he planned on conquering in the galactic south. From this point he was almost equidistant from Griffon, from the majority of the Exodite worlds, from the majority of the night worlds, from a good number of feral and feudal worlds, and defended from the galactic south by a comparatively large warp storm engulfing the region. Jadathra, too, would soon be engulfed in this warp storm. This would normally be a problem, but he had the aid of the Exodites in this matter. A webway gate was quickly constructed, and from this point he would be able to enter and leave unhindered, while any invaders would be cut off from the planet for several thousand years. This natural protection was potentially risky with chaos about, which is why he had many of the initial Bonezingers focusing on the construction of a massive series of warp protections and sigils to prevent outside forces from slipping in. The same type of warcraft they used to protect their gates from daemons, applied to a planetary scale. Perhaps in the future a world spirit could be established here as well, but that was too long-term to be cost-effective at the moment. Those two entirely too many resources to set up from what he had been told of the process by world singer Saban. The labor of a few thousand years of careful warpcraft, fueled by many thousands of psychic souls, contained in a singular psychic network. Impractical for the moment. The majority of the remaining Eldar military was not with his conquest. Instead, the bulk of their fleet had been taken by Malekith up to Deatha to establish the base of operations that would eventually be the site of their foray into the Eye of Terra. They would be responsible for establishing a series of fortress worlds around the Eye to prevent future expansions by the demons spilling out of it and to provide a safe dominion from which to launch their joint attack. It would be his duty to establish an allied state. The Eldar would provide aid in return for mutual alliances, but this state would be human foremost. Asarnil himself was busy on Charnak, managing the immense number of civilian Eldar he had just been forced to take in, and working to create a network of webway gates that would link each of the Exodite worlds in the region together. This would be the start of something, Saban saying he would need a council of other world singers to be sure. Jadathra would be his unassailable capital world, protected by fearsome storms, a shining world of white fortresses, productive cities, verdant fields, and an ancestral caste of warriors to recruit from. A place where his first recruitment facilities were being established already. Those few thousand years of unassailability is exactly what he needed as a backup plan, in case all things fall apart and his dreams of a better future are thoroughly crippled. And should the worst not come to pass, it would be his productive capital from which his initial pool of soldiers and Astartes recruits will be drawn from. A year-long, 5-year, 10-year, and century-long draft of plans for the capital had already been drafted, and a component administrator from Charnak had already been recruited and selected for this specific purpose. They would be joined by a small group of tech priests, who in turn would call in the initial machinery to industrialize the world in accordance with Guilliman's plans. He was hardly about to let his capital be ugly or inefficient. Neither of those things were desirable for long-term productivity and advancement. Currently, the volunteered sons of the entire planet within the appropriate age range were being tested against his gene seed. If they were compatible enough to have a high likelihood of surviving the process and training, then they would be recruited as his initial legion. The Mark I power armor brought by the Thunder Warriors was already being analyzed by Griffon for production and potential improvements. These would be combined with wraithbone shells produced by Exodite Bonezingers to produce armor that was, while not mechanically on par with what he was used to, had strictly superior plates of material to protect his soldiers with. Wraithbone would serve as the armor and basic melee weaponry of essentially his entire force, a large stockpile of both already produced by allied Exodites and ready to be handed out to soldiers when he started recruiting them, which was now. Lasguns were specifically requested from Griffon, which they were at first confused by but then convinced of by his focus on logistics above anything else. The venerable lasgun was something he had come to appreciate in his later campaigns. a modest weapon that fired a concentrated burst of heat energy from a battery pack. The weapon was immensely durable, standing up to most any condition save direct, intentional damage. The weapon was powerful enough for most standard threats, such as other humans and minor xenos. The weapon's battery was rechargeable from almost any standard source, up to and including ambient heat from sunlight or a campfire. A weapon that relied on essentially no supply lines to keep functional. For mass production, almost nothing came close. He had been hoping that Griffon had a model he was familiar with from his youth in the original cycle's Great Crusade, the Calibrax VI. Unfortunately, their most common model was, unsurprisingly perhaps, the Griffon Ver. Occasionally mounted as tertiary-tier weapons on knights and titans under their control, they were designed to be mounted on the Warwalker and have more efficient recharging from ambient heat at the cost of less overall shots before recharge was needed. Griffon used them as Walker-scale anti-infantry micro-guns that slowly recharged from the ambient heat of the fusion engine, used on targets that you didn't wish to waste ammo on from your larger, more effective guns. It was usable, but not ideal. Indeed, the quicker recharge from ambient heat would most likely prove immensely effective over longer campaigns. It was simply disappointing at the moment. He made a note to how some of these models mounted on just about every vehicle he could fit them on. Lasguns were very lightweight, and the extra firepower would likely come in handy many times for his soldiers. More than enough weight would be saved by using wraithbone armor shells for this to be a worthy investment. The final tightening of the last strap told him it was about time. He brought his hand up to inspect it before turning his gaze towards the large mirror set up for him. It was also very far away to ensure he could actually see most of himself in it. He barely recognized himself in truth. What he remembered looking in the mirror was a man, a handsome man perhaps, with a dutiful line to his jaw and a contemplative weight to his brow. Handsome in a plain way, unlike the beauty inherent to some of his brothers. What he remembered seeing in the mirror was a man with deep lines on his face, with eyes covered in the shadows of an ever-furrowed brow, a glint of exhaustion in his eyes and lips pulled down in an unshakable frown. What he saw in the mirror was a man with a steely glare and a natural tendency to quirk his lips in amusement. A man with ambitions and determination to achieve those ambitions. A man who had faith that his efforts would pay off in the end. What he saw was himself, a man reeling in his second chance like a starving fisherman reeled in the largest catch of his lifetime. He found himself grinning, a vicious grin, a determined grin, a challenging grin, an expression almost foreign to his face, and yet one he couldn't find himself shaking just yet. All of a single world to his name, perhaps the lowest level imperial power he's had in centuries, and yet he feels like he was already holding the galaxy in his palm. He had to be careful that this uplifting mood didn't lead to mistakes in his planning. Overconfidence was the greatest enemy of the commander. "Thank you, Miriel." He turned his gaze to the lone maid that helped him into this overly fancy formal wear. He had left the initial design to the weavers of Charnak, but that may have been a mistake in retrospect. They dressed him as if he was an exodite dragon lord, but with some of the motifs that had likely leaked from their first impressions of the Imperium, from the stories he had told of it to other eldar. Apparently that meant a combination of mesh armor underlayer, a tunic of white, a tabard of blue and white, shield-like armor plates on his shoulders, collarbones and hips decorated in various symbols, a long cloak of red held in place by a large pauldron designed to look like a massive golden eagle and a golden laurel crown. The gloves and boots had entirely too many fiddly straps. He could have put them on himself, but Miriel insisted on aiding him. She bowed promptly for the appropriate durations and then raised up again. "I believe the people are ready to hear your speech, honored friend of Charnak." He quirked his brow for a moment, taking note of how unwieldy such a title was. "I believe we've known each other long enough. Please call me Robut." Miriel's ears flickered as her expression remained blank. "It would hardly be appropriate, Hom." He reached up and put a finger on her lips, giving a small smirk of amusement. "The full formalities are a bit much when it's just the two of us. Please do this for me." He pulled his finger away and awaited her response. She was silent for a long moment, staring at him, ears moving in the slight distress of a by-the-book maid asked to be less formal. Eventually she bowed and replied, "If that is your wish, King Reboot, He exhaled in slight amusement, 2 steps forwards and 1 step back, he supposed. "Thank you, Miriel." He turned to the hallway that led to the castle balcony and considered it for a moment. In the distance, he could hear the conversations of a crowd waiting for his presence, waiting to hear what he intended for them and their world. For once, the galaxy was waiting on him to act. The feeling was strangely welcome. This acknowledged, he really had no time to waste on feeling good about himself. "Well, it's no good to keep my people waiting. Let's get this done with." He started moving 1 step after another out towards the true start to his territorial ambitions, the first world of his new empire and planned fortress capital of the overall conquest, the new seat of his noble rule and the throne world from which he would administrate the whole of a fresh new empire. The feeling was similar to seeing rows of corn ready for their first harvest. He had spent 5 years planting the seeds. Now was time to reap, and with these fruits he would plant the second harvest. The world was unimpressive compared to the vast domains he was used to governing, but it was a good seed planted in wholesome soil, and the potential within it was immense. His duty, of course, was to administrate vast domains. That's what he had been designed to do. That's what he excelled at. It was his function as a tool of the Emperor, of his father, and he intended to function most effectively. Mankind deserves nothing less. He could go back to being a man after the galaxy was put back into order. Within the inner courtyard of Keep Serpentrest, a crowd of thousands were accumulated and busying themselves with muttering. Excited muttering, worried muttering, discussion and shouting, brawls kept to a minimum by stern-eyed looks from the dozens of knights stationed along the sides and standing among the crowds. Nobles had been addressed the night before in a grand feast, but that affair was more private and focused on affairs of logistics and states. It was a practical affair, with the grim practicalities of governance first in the minds of those attending and discussing. Here the lower nobility were gathered, the more important merchants and mayors, the people of the capital, the bards and storytellers, the scholars and soldiery, the clerics and lesser priests. Here were the people who had little say in the path the state took, but had a great deal of worry for it nevertheless. Along the walls, in the shadowed crooks and crannies, wherever they could fit, the lower classes skulked. The gamblers and money pinchers, the swineherders and beggars. The common labourers had been allowed to the edges for this historic event. For in a series of duels already fast approaching legend status, a single man in armour of blue and weapons of burning gold had faced off against the titanic machinery of the nobility and defeated each and every one. He was astride no war-walker of his own, even if he later demonstrated several under his command. He did not call down ordnance from the heavens or assassins in the night, even if he had many of both. This giant of a man had come to their world and duelled every one of their greatest defenders, emerging the victor from all. This giant of a man had taken their most rigorous test of strength, designed to be laughable for anyone to complete even in a war-walker of their own, and passed with fanfare. The law of kings was their strength of arms. A man strong enough to defeat all of them was obviously deserving to be their king. They couldn't stop him if he wished for that crown. All they could do was hope that their new king did not feel like being a tyrant. Onto the balcony overlooking the immense courtyard, the giant walked out, ducking his head through the overlarge entrance and standing like an immense and beautiful statue decorating the side of an ancient cathedral. A king in blue and white, clad in red, crowned in gold. His eyes looked over the several thousand in his new keep's yard, a bare pittance of the planet's population, but enough to make a record of this event and to spread word of what transpired during it. After a long, searching moment, the king opened his mouth and began to speak. The age of strife is over. 5,000 years of darkness, of suffering, of constant assaults by the mad, the savage, the brutal, the evil. 5,000 years of enduring the humiliation of loss, again and again. An age that has ravaged the galaxy, all of its corners and all of its planets and all of its people. An age that has left nothing untouched, undamaged, unaffected. An age that has brought low our dreams of progress and ever upwards ascent as a collective. An age that killed our old federations and alliances and left us buried under the corpse of a galaxy that collapsed under its own weight. An age that murdered our golden age. That age is over now. The time of strife is over now. Now heralds a new age. With the relics of our past, and with the bare scraps of knowledge and power we still have available to us, we must now begin the laborious process of putting things right. The fires that consumed the galaxy have died down now, and now we must snuff out the ashes. Now we must till the garden once more and sow the seeds of a new age. It shall not be easy. Before us is war. War that stretches on for 1,000 years or more. War that will require soldiers, machines, knights and heroes. War that will require allies, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, old, young, all of us. War to put down the horrors that set the galaxy aflame to begin with. I will not ask of you anything I am unwilling to do myself. Before me I see only constant labor. I see wars of conquest, I see politicking and diplomacy, I see constant revisions and refinements to my strategies and plans. I do not see rest for myself. I do not see easy sleep or peaceful moments. I see myself at the head of 1,000 battles, each one more tiresome than the last. But beyond all that, I see a light of a good and just galaxy, a galaxy filled with virtuous hearts and just rulers, a galaxy of strong soldiers and secure homeworlds. I see a galaxy that is good and upright, one that our descendants will enjoy for thousands of years after us. A sun is a brilliant golden light, one that shines over a world, one that turns night into day, that banishes all evil and lays low all darkness. I cannot promise a golden future, one free of all evils, for evils ever seek the hearts of pain souls. Pain is inevitable, and thus there will always be evil to confront. Already evil is abundant in this galaxy, the refuse of 5,000 years of pain. I cannot promise the light of a golden sun, for I am just a man. I promise the light of the silver stars. I promise points of shining nobility throughout the sea of darkness that the galaxy is drowning within. I promise righteous warriors, standing side by side, and together turning the darkness of the void into a sea of shining stars. I promise a unity of stars lasting for thousands of years, and perhaps more. I promise you a silver millennium, and perhaps afterwards the dream of resurgent gold. All I ask is that you labor with me. All I ask are hands to help put this galaxy straight. I can show you the way, I can guide the work, but the task is beyond me alone. I need you. Tell me, people of once, Jadathra. Tell me, people of my new capital. Tell me, people of Bastion. Would you give unto me this? Do you dream of brother stars and united kingdoms? Do you dream of silver that might one day be gold? Tell me, people of Albion, do you share my dream? The roar of a crowd was the king's answer. Ma and Pa had never tried to hide it from her. When she was old enough to understand, they told her that she came from the stars and revealed a flowing stream when she landed. It was a source of idle wonder for her, but nothing much more. Being distracted at the job was a quick way to lose a finger to hungry machinery, so she had to focus then. She worked in the kids sections for most of her life. Easy stuff that wasn't too dangerous and wasn't too difficult. Mostly carrying stuff around for the adults. Handing tools off to people underneath machines. Fitting into crawl spaces and telling others what they saw inside. Cleaning and oiling parts. Simple tasks that let her learn the names of all the tools and machinery around her. It was only recently that she became big enough to do other things, like assembling components, sorting boxes, and a little bit of wiring. Most people were too tired to do much more than eat and sleep when they got home, but not her. It took days of work to get her tired enough to fall asleep, which left her with time in the late hours before her next shift. She usually busied herself with more learning, reading the instruction manuals for various parts of machines, but that wasn't always enough to hold her attention. Sometimes she just laid in bed and thought about things, mostly about where she came from and why she was different from everyone around her. It was lonely, but she tried not to let that keep her down. Pa's advice was always, if you're too tired to think, you can't get down about it. The problem with that being that Fulgrim took a lot longer to get tired, longer than her shifts were. Ma's advice was always, find a cute boy to squeeze, and you won't be thinking about that soon enough. The problem being, the boys her age were all little kids. Certainly not main squeeze material, as Ma would tiredly joke with a cup of caf in hand. Pa always gave Ma a glare when she joked like that in front of her. She had imagined all sorts of answers for where she came from. Maybe she came from a secret lab, programmed by men in white coats and energy measurements in hand. Maybe she came from a distant world, sent here to save her from some great calamity. Maybe she was summoned by some sorcerer, crafting in a ritual using blood and whatnot. Maybe she was the princess of a distant world, where things were colorful and people had time to do something other than work. It had been half a year, or about that, since she had found out, and she still wasn't used to it all. There were 50 people in the chamber, many of which constantly sent glances her way, making her reach for a hat that wasn't on her head. Her white hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was dressed in a robe that seemed fit for a company commander more than a weird laborer girl like her. Seated upon a slab of golden metal that likely cost as much as a city on Chemos did, she felt precariously high. Seated on the other leg, utterly unbothered by the stairs, was her sister. Danu, who was younger than her, had confidence that Fulgrim couldn't muster. She was sitting with eyes open and curious, looking at the hologram being projected in front of them, and of course upon the words of the giant that they were sitting on the legs of, her sorcerer king father from a distant world, who ritually programmed her in a techno-sorceress laboratory. Apparently her being sent away was the calamity, so she got that wrong at least. As Ma often said, life was funny that way. By my hand, thy spirits and flesh was shaped. Know beyond peradventure this is truth, Topius. It was difficult to describe his voice. It rolled like distant thunder. It rose and fell like chemical reservoirs. The vocabulary was hard to pass at times, old-fashioned and archaic. It was gentle, in the way a grand machine was gentle, by deliberate and precise control over its own mechanisms. An engine of massively restrained power. "Mother?" Danu questioned bluntly, letting the voice wash over her without particular interest in its timbre. She was focused on the image before her of their apparent true homeworld, a distant place named Terra, war-torn but recovering. Massive structures built across its surface and mountains being carved out into new constructions. It looked like a much brighter place than Chemos. The giant shifted slightly, letting the hologram linger. Fulgrim knew better than to worry about his displeasure now, but it was a near an instinctive thing. To have him pause in evaluation made her feel small and subject to great judgment. Danu, of course, was utterly unafraid of making errors, something she strived to emulate. It was hard to get better at something if you hesitated to practice for fear of failure. The only way she'd improve is if she was willing to make errors. Manifold servants were at my disposal, aiding to monitor thy creation. However, they did not fulfill the roles of a human mother. None did. Thy mother wombs were ones of artifice. Chambers of plasteel, brimming with primordial waters. Petch. She wasn't particularly surprised to learn that she was apparently made in a vat. Most people on Chemos were already. Being pregnant simply took too long when there was work to do. She was glad she at least had this in common with Pa and Ma. The giant rumbled for a moment before raising a finger. "It is time for your lessons, my daughters." Topius taking note of the time displayed on the hologram, she blinked before sliding off his massive leg. Raising her arms up, Danu slid down into them and was then deposited onto the ground. They were all getting taller, much faster than humans would, but it didn't feel fast enough. Danu still wasn't quite tall enough to slide down like she could. "Goodbye, father. I will return." Fulgrim gave her best smile. Ma always said it was ladylike to smile, and she promised Ma and Pa that she would do her best to be a proper lady. It's why she carried around tox spray for grabby adults instead of beating them with her wrench, not ladylike to bludgeon folks black and blue. Of course, if they wanted her to be a proper lady, they should have given her a ladylike name, Fracket. "See you again, father." She bowed properly. "Fare ye well, my daughters." Father rumbled, his voice giving off the impression of warmth. It was hard to make out his face behind that near-constant glow of his eyes, a side effect of using his psychic powers, he had once explained. Grabbing Danu's hand to stop her from climbing down the front of the pyramid, Fulgrim walked around the side to go down the stairs actually meant for people. Honestly, why was their father a giant? He didn't explain that last time Danu asked. Ignoring that question just like she ignored the other, smaller giants clad in gold that walked with them and all the stares of the people on them as they circled around to leave the helm, she thought about what to do. Behind her, she could distantly hear the weird-looking woman with an unnerving stare call out to father. "Lord Emperor, we will be arriving at Baal shortly. Danu, let's visit Madonna." Their newest found sister was dramatic, loud, boastful, and from what Fulgrim could tell, trying her best to impress them. Danu was silent for a long time. Her sister was far from impulsive and tried her best to consider things before taking a course of action. It was a very cute habit. Lessons, she spoke. Fulgrim turned towards one of the golden giants that was escorting them and spoke with her best smile. May we visit our sister before our lessons? Staring down at her for a time, the giant eventually nodded. Turning back to look at Danu, she waited for her sister to consider the topic again. Okay, Danu eventually declared. Red Sister was loud and said many unimportant things. Oh ho ho, you see how your defences crumble before my artifice? Tremble in despair at what I have wrought. Red Sister boasted loudly as her small construct rampaged around in Danu Dawn's representation fields. Danu Dawn had not adequately defended that section of her construct settlement, and now it would be damaged for some time. To encourage and develop their technical and strategic skills, Father had given them a game he claimed was a gift to them from his friend. Each player held control over a holographic territory. Their goal was to expand their territory and dominate their competitors, whether through alliances and diplomacy or conquest and war. Many variables could be controlled in the game, including the designs of the tiny virtual robots that acted as citizens and warriors for each territory. The game was turn-based, allowing each player time to alter these variables and enact them, while ensuring each player received a fair allotment of time. It was her favorite game. Tallest Sister preferred sparring and development. Taller Sister liked to play, but also preferred practicing physical skills and practical engineering. Danu Dawn liked both of those things very much as well. Red Sister liked reading books, practicing dramatic declarations, showing off her psychic powers, and this game. She played much like Danu Dawn imagined a man who was slowly, methodically being fed to a great ice shark would play like. Taking her turn, Danu ignored the boasting of Red Sister and typed in the various commands on her interface console. Recognizing the fields as lost, without significant investment of manpower, she turned all of her artillery upon the area. This would ensure her representation grain would be lost entirely, but also ensure the destruction of Red Sister's large new war construct. Then she commanded her flying military force to fly above the reach of Red Sister's laser towers and drop their payloads upon her factories. Pressing the confirmation button, Danu Dawn watched blankly as Red Sister started to panic and then writhe in almost agony as the holographic bombshells began to rain. No, no, no. No, wait. That isn't fair. You're destroying your own fields. What are you doing? No. My King Hydra. Please don't die. No, wait. Grand Annihilators hit the drone drakes. They're right there. No. NOO. My workshops. Red Sister collapsed against the console interface, shaking with despair as her tactical errors were demonstrated again. Now that she knew where her errors were, she could improve upon them and not make as many errors later. Grandpa Dawn had taught her that, and he was smart, so she would listen to him. Red Sister recovered. Throwing herself up to point a finger at her, she began to loudly declare, "YOU. You know that this means war? For the death of my beloved King Hydra, I can do nothing more than destroy you. He will have vengeance." Danu looked down to the title inscribed on the chess box that the game came stored within. Little War, a game for boys from 12 years of age to 150, and for that more intelligent sort of girl who likes boys' games and books, inscribed in Terran script and dated to 903rd, M21. The date on the game meant that it was very old. Looking back at Red Sister, she replied, "Yes, it was indeed war." Behind her, Taller Sister sighed. Before her, Red Sister's hands twitched in frustration. It would not be her turn for at least 2 more turns, and now it was time for their lessons. Walking around the table, she grabbed her sister's hand and began to pull her away from the table. "Gah! Unhand me, you brute!" Red Sister tried to tug away, but she didn't exercise enough. "Lesson time," she explained, not bothering to let go. "I am not a brute," she corrected. Wait. I need my scepter." A custodian was already behind Red Sister, scepter in hand, and extended to her. Danu let go of her hand, and Red Sister took her scepter sheepishly before spinning around and raising it high. "Let us be off. My sorcerer's sight tells me that new knowledge awaits us. We are not in the auditorium. You cannot see the presentation through walls," Danu Dawn pointed out as they began to walk. She reached up to grab Taller Sister's hand. It was warm. "Quick. You have much to learn about the dark arts, young foolish sister." Red Sister's hand was grabbed by taller Sister, and although she did not offer it initially, she did not pull away. Was Danu Dawn's hand cold? Yes, that was correct. She did have much to learn about dark arts. She would ask Father about them during their next Warcraft lesson. She was curious what effect illumination had on psychic effects. Taller Sister exhaled again. She was holding her breath by mistake, most likely. She was taller and stronger than all but the largest and most brutish of the chem junkies on Cathonia, the ones that were already brutal giants and had injected themselves with a lethal cocktail of enhancers, all for a final hurrah of monstrous power. Those gangers could shatter stone with their fists and kick through iron bars, even as their bones broke and organs melted. She was stronger than anyone short of that on Cathonia. It was upon leaving that she realized just how weak that actually was. The open palm slammed into her chest, sending her flying back to crash against the wall of the sparring chamber. Dozens of feet crossed in an instant and stunning her for a brief moment. Ignoring the stars in her eyes, she gave the wall a harsh elbow, shaking the bones in her arm, but sending her away. Rolling along the wall to the side, she avoided the second palm strike that impacted the wall like a cannon. The air shook with the impact. The bald, bronze-skinned man pushed off to recover, and she followed. Hesitation was defeat, and bruises could be accepted in exchange for decisive victory. Not that she's won yet. She swiped out with a kick, aiming for his legs to knock him off balance. The bronze-skinned man gave a tiny hop. Her leg passed through air. She threw her weight with it. His foot rocketed forwards. Having thrown her weight the moment before, she had spun just enough to avoid the foot. Said foot was accompanied by a rush of air intense enough to make her hair wave wildly about. She was facing the ground now, propelled by the rotation of her kick. Hands braced against the metal floor. Her body coiled up like a great spring. He couldn't avoid this attack, suspended in the air like he was. A three-stage setup. And then all at once, she uncoiled, snapping out into a double-footed mule kick behind her. Her feet impacted hard flesh. Like lightning, the bronze-skinned man shot away, crashing against the wall of the chamber himself. She could hear his impact, a heavy and weighty boom as he met the metal walls of the sparring room. She quickly moved to recover, plus your efforts are bearing fruit. Plus, a great voice rumbled out from the door of the sparring room. It was weighty and massive, like the steps of the giant war machines that the machine priests operated. She hastened her efforts to stand up, turning, and, boom, a foot smashed down next to her hand. The warrior attached to it, stopping himself immediately with a great effort, muscles tensed with exertion. The bronze-skinned man was right behind her. Open palm stopped moments from slamming her back into the floor from his position. Her eyes widened as she staggered back slightly, taking in the situation again. She had kicked him into the wall. Damn it. Too close to the ceiling, he had pushed off from the top to recover quicker, then kicking off the wall once he was next to the ground to ready an attack before she was ready. Were it not for her father's interruption, she'd be suffering yet another defeat. She had been one of the meanest girls on the southern side turf back on Cathonia. Up in the stars, she was still small fry. She grimaced as she rose, watching her tutor fall into a proper bow towards the giant that had entered the room. Custodian Aristocles was one of their tutors, teaching them history, rhetoric, and politics. It just so happened that he was also one of the premier unarmed combatants among the custodians. When it came to general combat, he was declared as being average among the Golden Host. Average. She had yet to earn a single victory over him in any form of combat. The difference between a street brawler and a professional warrior, she supposed. Grunting, she stopped complaining to herself and focused on the giant in the room. The gang called her Star Girl because she crashed from the stars above. Makes sense that she had a family out there, but she never really bothered considering it before then. She was busy trying to get slick enough to do jobs and eventually earn a kill name. No point in dwelling on what might be out there, because she sure as shit wasn't going up there anytime soon. She was wrong, as it turned out. She was apparently some kind of artificial superhuman murder princess, made to kick ass and take worlds for her creator. Really, though, she wondered why the hell he needed her when he had a few hundred of these custodians lying around back on Terra. One of these guys could smear every ganger on Cathonia if they had enough time. What the frack was so special about her? Her father was smiling at her. Through that ever-present glow in his eyes, she could tell. She huffed out to rid herself of the whining and smiled back, walking over to speak to him easier. I'd say so, yeah. Pretty soon I'll be giving you lessons. The custodian was too polite to smile, but her father gave a weighty chuckle at that. I anticipate that day. ... Turning to the custodian, he spoke again. Custodian Aristocles, you are required among my forces upon Baal. With fire and war, it must be cleansed. Gather thy war gear, go to the field commander, and muster according to his orders. She frowned slightly at that, worried. The custodian bowed again and left promptly, and she waited until he was gone to question. I thought Baal is where our next sister would be found. Why does it need to be cleansed? Her father gave a small exhale in frustration, a massive thing that made her hair fall back. Apparently, he had eaten something like spiced grox recently. We have arrived too early. She has not landed yet, plus. She nodded, understanding where this was going. So we're clearing out everything that might endanger her when she arrives, and setting up an outpost to send word when she does. Gangers did similar things, usually for getting first servings of shipments from automated production facilities. He nodded, indeed. A shield host of my custodians and 100 ships will remain in this place to found a stronghold and city ready for her arrival. Putpus 100? That was more than he left at any other world so far. She frowned lightly, considering something. Father, how do you know where each of us will arrive? Scouts or some psychic thing we haven't gotten to yet? Her father was silent for a time, considering the question. She raised her brow as she saw how deeply he was thinking about the topic. This was serious then, and that brought her a small amount of worry. Eventually, rumbling and deliberate, her father spoke again. I know by the scouting efforts of I Kill Evil, your older brother. Brass! She blinked, feeling slightly stunned by the revelation. We have a brother? Wait, what was his name? Her father nodded. You have 2 brothers. I Kill Evil, and I Bring Light. I Bring Light busies himself with slumber in the lower chambers of the ship when not at war. He will be aiding the purgation of Baal. I Kill Evil is in a distant territory, busy with conquest. You will be allowed to meet both in time, if you desire. But Puss, furrowing her brow, she deliberately ignored their names for a moment and focused on another factor. Why did you not tell us we had brothers before? Her father looked at her and raised an imperious brow. The topic did not arise to Biles, ache, That made sense, she supposed. He stands 33 feet tall. He weighs 66 short tons. His skin are plates of burnished steel. His muscles are beams of banded hydraulics. His bones are struts of hot-wove plasteel. His right hand is a revolving cannon, his pinky another gun. His left hand clenched with power and crackled with energy. A gun extended from his heart, and from it he spat hateful bolts. He was his knight armor, not the weak slabs of mortal flesh that just so happened to house his mind and cock, currently plugged into his real body. That blood-filled thing was for entertainment and maintenance. This frame was what he truly was. Subject to change if he ever found a stronger frame, of course. Getting content was a good way to get dead. He ignored the grumbling from the ghost in his throne. Stronger frame, dumbass, ain't that good? His right hand made a pleasing sound, as if the death wails of a dozen men, as it rotated and turned a line of braying and furious half-men into gore and red mist. He stomped through this, wading through their crude traps and smashing their puny warriors underfoot. The bio-reading cogitator wired into the side view of his cockpit alerted him to another 11 kills. A comfortable 300 thus far. He was aiming for at least 1,000 before the sun set. It was a shame the beastmen tried to flee instead of fighting. Each was 6 to 9 feet of pure muscle, probably could try harder than this if they really tried. Just intelligent enough to know that attempted resistance was futile. Not intelligent enough to make this any more fun for him. Not even stupid enough to make this more fun for him either. If they just charged at him instead of trying to hide, this would be over faster, don't they know? He was King Abram of Night House Cadmus, greatest butcher Riser has ever known. He had proved this with no less than 7 consecutive years of victory in the cull. The beastmen of Riser breed quickly in the darkness of the ever-deep wilder woods. It was necessary to purge them regularly, lest they attempt more dedicated attacks on the mountain keeps. Long ago, one of the most venerable and ancient ancestors had what is actually a grand idea, rare for what seemed to be an escalating series of shit decisions on their part. The house that performs best in our yearly culls shall lead the affairs of our world. They shall be our king, and all glory shall be upon his name. All the glory, all the women, and all the best fucking food. Damn it, Abram. Leave some for us. Don't let the big bastard win another year. I'm knocking you off your goddamn throne, blackguard. The delightfully aggrieved shouting coming from his weathered comlink made his meat body grin behind a plated helm. He was the young once, Baron Abram of House Cadmus, a title earned solely through his proficiency in slaughter. Were it up to popularity, he would be thrown to the beastmen to be torn apart. Loathed and feared in equal measure. Beloved by fucking no one, not since birth, not during life, and almost certainly not after death. The fuckers couldn't do a goddamn thing about his rule, not without going against all those fancy fucking traditions they held so highly. He was the best goddamn murderer Ryza had ever produced. He was going to stay in charge so long as he lived, lest they finally decide to toss out tradition and try to murder him instead of the beasts. He was looking forward to their inevitable attempts. The only difference between them and the beasts is that they would put up more of a fight. Well, unless they tried something outside of their armors. Fortunately, they were lackluster there too, and he wasn't. A nice crowd of charging beastmen invited him to use his nice missiles, one screaming forwards on jet fire and trailing smoke, before crashing into the center of the group. The explosion and shrapnel tore through 7 more. They attempted to smash into his knees with massive meter-long clubs and axes. The first thing the fuckers always went for. They couldn't hit anything else. He crouched and swiped a massive armored hand in a wide arc. Beastmen turned into sprays of gore as cracking, disruptive energy flooded their weak meat frames. Another 3 died in the process of painting his left side a lovely shade of red. His right hand roared, and a spray of 1.18-inch diameter bullets cut the rest of the group in half. Organs and guts smeared across a 12-feet-long cone behind their heads and legs. 2 more. He was going to run out of ammo about halfway to his goal. That was fine. The latter half of the cull always required mostly melee to keep going. Ammunition bins running empty would only stop amateurs from keeping the murder going. Said amateurs using mostly guns like cowardly shits. Of course, pure melee meant that you were shit out of luck for long-range targets, like the ones his optics just spotted attempting to hide. Mostly females and young. Some knights would pick out the less repulsive-looking ones to fut back in their private keeps, called it conquering the wilds or something stupid like that. He didn't have any interest in fucking a hole with a goat's head, though. He stuck to the bastard daughters of such unions. They were less repulsive to look at, human faces with fat tits and an eagerness to please. The wild ones? Those were for the slaughter. He fired a missile and let the fire and gore wash over his optics. He began a malicious, snarling laughter as he trampled deeper into the wilderwoods of Ryza. His right hand roared, his left hand burned, and his footsteps smashed half-men into puddles of blood and bile. The forest floors were hard and dense, pummeled by thousands of years of knight armors, stomping beast flesh into the dirt. They made a good surface for chasing meat through fragile thickets. He thanked whatever gods may be, because he loved himself. Someone certainly had to do it. He was going straight to hell when he finally went down. He'd been told that his whole goddamn life. Might as well live while he could, huh? The ghosts in his throne sighed, announcing his 8th consecutive victory in our most honorable culling of the beastmen, King Abram of House Cadmus, with 1,634 of their number dead by the arms of his knight armor. The herald called out in the midst of the immense plateau where the dozens of knight armors that still functioned from the hundreds of years of decreasing repair efficiency. The knight scholars knew just enough to keep them repaired and ammo stocked, and that was about it. So naturally, as king, he took the choice bits for himself for his personal knight armor. It was tradition to name each knight armor after a heroic deed or knightly virtue. Astride his noble knight armor, Butcher Beast, His Majesty claims another year of leadership. May the King of Life bless him with his divine wisdom. It had a different name before he first became king. His first decree was to have it painted pitch black and renamed. This was a whole lot more fitting, he felt. Standing on top of his knight armor's back and looking out to the assembled, he let a wide, vicious grin paint the lower half of his face. Around him his competitors despaired and raged, often throwing their helmets to the ground in fury and ranting to themselves. Another year that he was not dethroned. Around them their various horned slaves did their best to assuage their lords and masters, while wives watched impassively on. dressed in fine garbs and holding data slates of various types, the ones that handled all that boring governance shit while their husbands and sons had fun with the murder and the feasting. It's not like they didn't have their own blood sports going on, it's just women preferred the murder to have some mystery drama bullshit that he had no time for. In the distance, thousands of commoners cheered as they heard how much less likely the half-men in the woods were going to climb the mountains and murder everyone in their sleep, possibly combined with a rape or being eaten, and in no specific order. Beastmen were unpleasant sorts like that. He let out a rumbling chuckle as they carefully avoided looking at him. His reputation was almost as unpleasant. The black-clad Slaughter King. He'd kill you if he feels like it that day, don't you know? He won't torture you, sure, but he's got to murder at least once a day. He's got beast blood in him. Violence is his nature. Ignoring, of course, that most of the commoners had dainty horns coming out of their heads, unlike him. Looking down, he took a few steps with mechanical feet to reach the ledge of his knight armor before making a short leap off. The machine slaves could handle taking it back to the armory. His nearly 500-pound body smashed against the rocky terrain with a relatively tremendous boom for a human to make. His mechanical limbs absorbed the shock of the impact with relatively little pain, and slowly he rose to his full 7-foot height once more. When you get into enough scraps, eventually you need to replace a few limbs. Old ones break on you. He had been getting into scraps since he was born. He kept his contemptuous grin on his face as he walked onwards, ceremony basically over already. A woman was waiting for him with a cold expression and an overly stuffy dress. His mood soured immediately as the other half of Golem Keep's administration started walking in step with him. Normally, it was tradition that the current wife of the king handled the administration of Ryasa. Unsurprisingly, just about every woman on the planet absolutely refused to marry him on grounds that he was a walking monster. So it came that he just told Wealthhowl, the previous king's wife, to keep handling it. She was competent enough, even if she was a massive cunt. The sensor watchers tell us there are ships in our system. She tensely spoke out, little of the usual cuntiness in her voice. He raised a brow as she continued. They claim diplomacy in old human tongues, but this could easily be deception. He considered it for a moment. Have the knight armors rearmed and don't disperse the pilots yet. Then keep the sensors watching for guns getting ready and prepare a welcoming feast. A welcoming feast. She snarled out in a whisper. I tell you there are ships at our door, and you say to prepare a welcoming feast. Women were not taught about proper warfare on Ryza. It made sense that she didn't know how to react to this. Women warred with poison and dainty knives. I'll change your official title to cunt if you don't shut up, woman. He growled out in turn. They have ships, which means orbital bombards. If they want to kill us, they easily could, so that's moot fucking point. If they want to conquer us, all our knights are here, so we need a reason for them to stick around. And a feast for them to indulge in? She trailed off, considering the factors. Smart women, brain worked quick once someone pointed her in the right direction. We'll keep them around long enough to fight would-be conquerors. He growled out, completing the thought. I'll have the servants water down the wine. She tersely replied, Are you all? He frowned deeply. It was probably for the best. The many knights of Ryza couldn't seem to hold their fucking drinks, but now the wine was going to taste like shit. Have my slave girls attend me. Having one on my lap might make the wine bearable. He commanded. Servants. The King Abram, not slaves. She grumbled out, ignoring the impunity of it. He rolled his eyes and ignored her sharp glare. What was the difference? Both were people you ordered to do shit that you didn't want to do. Tell Hrothgar to come too. I haven't had a good brawl since he retired. She glared at him, but didn't respond. He turned to her with a quizzical look on his brutish face. She refused to look at him, teeth grinding in her jaw and fists clenched around her data slate. Ah, Hrothgar was probably conquering the wilds right now. Horny old goat fucker. The Golem Keep was the mightiest fortress built on Ryza, right in the center of the greatest plateau and surrounded by the single largest city-state on the planet. It was hard to build any lower than up in the mountains. The beastmen were quick to swarm any settlement they could reach. The mighty Golem Keep was composed of 3 primary layers of construction. The highest layers were mostly wooden, add-ons for whatever his predecessors wanted. Currently, there were great ships plated in bone hovering overhead, sides of their bulks bristling in currently deactivated weapons. The second highest layer was mundane stone interlaced with steel beams. great construction that served as the bulk of the keep's overall mass. The bottom layer, widest and most durable, was composed mostly of stony golem corpses. Golems were massive creatures of living wood and stone, conjured by some ancient spell towers in the deepest parts of the Wilderwood, and greatly displeased by any human trying to live here. Ryza used to have a golem problem, armies of things even larger than the knight armors marching forth to tear down keeps and trample humans into gore. He said used to because his predecessors were selfish pricks who didn't leave any left for him to fight. From the histories they have preserved, the golems were living castles and tore into knight armors like humans tearing into river crabs. Get the shell off to pick at the meat inside. It took 100 years of constant, brutal warfare to deal with the things and destroy their spell towers. He wished he could have killed a few. Inside the main keep itself, the great hall in the very center, were the primary trophies pillaged in ages past. The ones that they could display publicly, that was, the undervaults below the golem keep, were filled with random shit that landed on Ryza long ago. Obsidian meteorites that turns fresh into stone, golden drinking horns that never run out of beer that makes you sick, a woman with pointy ears in a stasis pod, things of that nature. The better trophies were on display. The skulls of beast champions, the ancient swords of fallen night kings, pelts of massive beasts from the deeper woods. And right over his throne, the centerpiece of Golem Keep, the preserved arm of the mightiest beast Ryza had ever seen, Mark Stepper. The arm, withered by salts and pickling, gruesome and wondrous to behold, was as long as knight armors were tall, some 30 feet in length, and looming over the feast hall from its ancient wooden supports. Gods, he wished he could have been at that fight. The beastmen were strong then, strong and furious. He let himself fall back in his chair, filling out the seat better than skinny old Hrothgar ever did, and resting a hand on his fist. The feast hall was full of tables and knights and merrymaking. Watered wine and meats hauled out to feed the many appetites, men and women getting into the spirit of the event as they waited for the star strangers to enter the hall. Obediently, his cute little slave crept up and curled into his lap. The little woman with curly little horns and a fine body shivered in his lap. He grinned in a cruel manner and brought a hand up to rest on her hip, squeezing and kneading in just the right way. She let out a cute gasp, bracing her hands against his chest and squirming, trying to disappear against his body. Just like everyone else on this rock, she hated and feared him in equal measure, terrified of his mere presence and trembling whenever he glanced at her for more than a moment. He took out his frustrations by making her squirm and writhe. He was a black-clad king after all, thuggish and beast-like, only fit for murder. The hall opened, and the herald at the door cried out, shouting over the merrymaking, announcing the Lord Guest of King Abram. The merrymaking grew quieter as the herald continued. High King Reboot, Lord of 24 systems, Master of warfare and statesmanship, and son of the Emperor of mankind. The feast hall was silent. A minotaur-sized man and his retinue strode into the great chamber, his head almost scraping against the immense oak doors that served as an entrance into this place. Golden-haired and blue-eyed, clad in thick plates of blue, bone, and covered in an immense white cloak, golden shield on his back, and golden sword at his waist. There was a sharp-eared woman by his side, as tall as Abram was, and did they have one of those down in the Underkeep? Might be good to get rid of it now. There was other men in armor flanking the stranger king, great big fuckers in thick plates and carrying big guns at their waist, guards probably. Abram frowned as he considered the stranger and his fancy armor and fancier titles for a moment. He kept up his ministrations on the slave girl's hip, who now writhed in deep embarrassment as well. He frowned deeper when he noticed how quiet the feast hall was. All his knights and their women were practically slack-jawed as they looked upon the stranger. They hadn't even turned their gazes to the rest of the retinue behind him. He let his face twist into a snarl as he shoved slave girl off to the side, now sitting on the arm of his throne and standing up. Are you bastards maidens swooning over the tall stranger? Get your fucking axe together before I shove you off the goddamn cliffsides. He roared out, causing many to break from their stupor and look at him in shock. This only lasted a moment before they remembered how much they hated him and started glaring. He huffed in fury before turning back to the stranger in blue, giving him a long look up and down. To his credit, the stranger looked amused rather than angry at the shouting. Not every day I meet a man taller than me. He growled out in consideration. No! rolling his neck and shoulders and frowning. "All right. You brought a fleet to Ryza. What do you want?" The tall stranger smiled all diplomatic-like before raising his hand to reveal a pretty little device. It glowed for a moment before showing off a holopict of the galaxy. "I am Robut, son of the Emperor of Mankind. The Herald already said this, dumbass. I seek to conquer the southern fifth of the galaxy, every world therein, and build a realm unconquerable. Your world is within this range. I would prefer if you join my banner as allies and not the conquered." He reached a hand up to scratch at his dark red beard. "I suppose you'll need lots of knights and land to develop then. Lots of places to conquer, enemies to slaughter?" The stranger smiled. "You are wrecked. I didn't expect to run out of wars for the rest of my life, and I need soldiers and war machines for them. I have plans for the development of this world, repair and improvement of its knight armors, and—" Abram held up a hand, signaling the tall stranger to stop talking. A sharp and toothsome grin filled his face, and savage intent filled his eyes. The sharp-eared women behind the stranger flinched. "You had my sword and banners when you spoke of endless war." After the standard round of threatening all his knights into shutting up and sitting down again, he let the stranger go through the motions of presentation to the wider audience. Abram himself had already been convinced, but his chicken-shit knights liked their assurances and rights to be upheld, whatever the fuck. They tried to weasel into what that meant at the time. So letting the stranger do this long-ass speech and round of answering questions with a hologram was something he just resolved to sit through. Something about military reorganizations and land developments or some shit. He only paid attention to the parts that involved getting more knight armors repaired and upgraded again. The rest of the time was spent tormenting Slave Girl, writhing in his lap and shuddering when he pressed in just the right ways. A mean old grin was on his face the entire time. Good to be king and all that. He had her sent back to her regular duties, namely his laundry, once the big meeting and subsequent feasting was done with. His knights looked skeptical but approving. Their womenfolk looked skeptical but excited, and he didn't have to lift a finger. His job was getting others to do their jobs, and slaughtering things, not this boring administration shit. Currently, he was walking with a few of the stranger's machinists and the man's personal guard. Abram technically should have a guard detail of his own, but there wasn't a single soldier willing to join the King's Guard with him in charge. Fine by him. He didn't need weak meatlings to protect him. He was more than capable enough on his own. The stranger himself got a strange look on his face when one of his knights mentioned conquering the wilds, said he wanted to go have an interview with a fuse or some shit like that. So apparently goat-fucking was common to kings, who knew? He didn't really give a shit regardless, so long as he got his new weapons and lots of things to kill. He pointed the man in the direction of Hrothgar and offered to escort his machinists to the night gallery. He had been sent with a machinist and another one of those people with pointy ears and a habit of flinching. The machinist walking with him was an interesting sort, he supposed. Almost as tall and heavy judging by the footsteps, little bits of his body and armor glowing with energy, face concealed behind an eagle helm of sorts, and a big, bulky backpack empowering the rest of his frame. Archimagos, calculators apparently, power mail, and a few machine implants, most likely. The quality was quite a bit better than the foot soldiers of Ryza, too. Abram almost opened his mouth to ask what the man had installed before reminding himself what he was. Black-clad butchers like him don't make small talk. They just kill. He kept his mouth shut. The other man was as tall as him, which was a surprise. He wasn't nearly as heavy, footsteps nearly silent as he seemed to glide over the terrain. Flowing robes of silk and leathers of some sort of immense reptile, covered by plates of smooth, bone-like armor, combined with the long-bladed staff and the mostly blank helmet, made an interesting sort of look. Bonesinger Celebrim, apparently. Heavy steps led him to the chamber doors, leading into the Golem Keep Night Chambers, the largest and most effective machining site on the entirety of Ryza. It was here that they managed to preserve most of what was required to keep their more advanced machines running during the time of Terras. Which made sense, as this was originally part of the ship that first brought human settlers to this world in the first place. The increasingly nervous-looking guards stepped aside with a wave of his hand, and the doors to the machining chambers opened wide. Inside was the greatest stockpile of knights on Ryza, most of which were non-functional, being used for spare parts for what they had that did still work. The colony had come to this world with something like 700 knight armors. Their records told them that was apparently a holy number, and thus standard in those times. Currently, they had just shy of 100 operational knight armors. Half of that was in the standard Questoris models. A fourth of that was in lighter armiger models. The remaining fourth was split between the larger Dominus and the occasional Cerastus models. There were 7 Acastus knights, 6 were non-functional, 1 was badly damaged and reserved solely for defense of the Golem Keep itself. Thousands of years makes its fucking mark. The machinists and slaves, most of which had horns and hooves, were quick at work, loading up the ammunition bins and dutifully polishing out the scratches in the armors, repainting the panels, hammering dents back into shape. The second and third sons of various nobles interfaced with the machines, reading out data slates and shouting orders to the manifold slaves. You could point them out because they didn't have horns. The knight armors were testy about that kind of thing. Kingswith. He roared out over the already immense noise of the massive inner chamber. At full capacity, this place could hold all 700 knight armors. Currently, the vast majority of it was filled with rows after rows of those armors, deactivated and slumped down in unpowered states, partially dismantled and scavenged for parts to maintain the armors that did still work. 600 or so war machines, none of which were currently usable. The third son of a king before the Hrothgar approached him, dressed and looking as all blacksmiths might. Thick arms and broad shoulders, working apron made from a minotaur's thick leather, thick gloves and boots from similar beast hide. He was wary as he approached, but the kingsmith was one of the few Abram didn't bother to threaten. He did his job in keeping all the knight armors going. No need to give him trouble, Your Majesty. He grumbled out, removing the protective visor helm and revealing a bushy moustache and squinty eyes. What can the Glemshop do to serve? Abram pointed a thumb at the men standing behind him. A stellar empire came by wanting an alliance. In exchange for signing up and fighting, they'd get some of their machinists called in to get our knight armors functional and upgraded again. Thick eyebrows raised up on the kingsmith's head. I'm to help with their survey, I suppose. He nodded, and the kingsmith nodded in turn. Right. I'd suppose we'd start with the overall state of affairs. Gentlemen, if he'd follow me to my data slates. Abram turned and strode away, no longer needed in this. If they tried something, he'd kill them, and everyone they were allied with until the fleet overhead shelled Risa off the galactic map. He stopped at the door and loomed over the 2 guards present. You watch the guests, got it? They shivered as they looked at him, trying their best to snap into a salute. Why, yes, Your Majesty. He snarled at their weakness before stomping away. The scowl on his face gradually settled down into an ever-present glare again. He stomped all the way to his private chambers again. Each time his path was crossed by another, they quickly found a way to leave the vicinity or duck into closets. The most annoying ones were the people he could hear muttering prayers of thanks after he left. Surrounded by cowardly fools and weak meat, they needed to install a machine spine. It's clear they aren't using the ones they have. His joints hurt. He ignored the lack of guards around his chamber doors. Opening the chamber and entering, he growled in an amused manner to see Slave Girl jump in fright, smacking her head against the desk and stumbling back. She fumbled with the cloth in her hands, resisting the urge to fiddle with it and the urge to rub her now sore head. Twisting brown horns contrasting against short-cropped blonde curls and ever-nervous green eyes. He huffed as he walked over to the large bed and grumbled out an order. Slave Girl, help me out of this armor. She quickly set the cloth down and hurried over, quickly undoing belts and connections in hard-to-reach places with practiced hands. While setting his pauldrons off to the side, she stuttered out a sentence. I was told by Queen Weltherhow to remind you that I'm supposed to be called A.S. Servant. She trailed off at his unimpressed expression. Tell her to fuck off. He grumbled out an order, knowing full well that she couldn't fulfill that. Now, free of that overlapping plate and the connections, he began to shed the unpowered carapace that served as his armor. Each time he disconnected something, Slave Girl would be quick to take the plate and set it off to the side. Eventually he was free of his armor and clad in the leather jumpsuit that served as the underlayer for his torso. With a hiss, his arm disconnected from his torso, and the jumpsuit was partially pulled off. Slave Girl tugged the leather out of the way, and he reconnected his arm with a second hiss, this one being of discomfort as his nerves protested the sudden changes. This process was followed with his other arm, then his left leg, then his right leg. Disconnect, remove, reconnect. It would be far more of a pain in his ass alone. Eventually he was nude, and sitting on his bed, knees and shoulders aching in that old familiar pain. He grunted as slave girl climbed over his bed and got to work, hands pressing into his back and shoulders, working at the knots and wear that had accumulated there since last time. Dainty little fingers doing their best to knead at scars and muscle. Sex was great and all, but getting rid of these aches were better in about every way. He let out a low groan of contentment and leaned into the ministrations. It took slave girl less time than normal to stop flinching every time he shuffled. Unfortunately, she started humming that annoying lullaby about halfway through his back. He ignored the irritation and just focused on the sensation of not being in pain for a brief while. Tolerating annoying habits was something he had to do as king. After some time, he cracked open an eye and looked around the room again. The sun was going down, judging from the light coming through the cracks in his thin window. Day was finally fucking over. Grunting, he flipped over and against the bed, using his arm to bring slave girl down into the bed with him. She made a noise like a startled animal as he landed against the sheets. My lord." I'm still distressed," she stuttered out, lightly pressed against his chest and not looking at him. How annoying, she should know, to shut up already. He grunted out in reply, letting her go and growling out an answer. "You have 3 minutes." In a nervous flurry, she pushed up and undid her garments, stumbling twice and accidentally crashing into the floor once. He brought his metal limbs under the more durable but colder leathers and raised them up quite patiently. His limbs would tear up anything softer, like cotton and silk. Soon enough, Rosalind's nubile form slipped under them and settled against his scarred chest. It was cold in his room, especially with his limbs being artificial. Turns out metal didn't warm up very well. He needed a bed warmer to sleep these days, otherwise he spent most of his time shivering, which was infuriating. He ignored her gentle humming, her roaming hands, and forced himself to sleep. He'd fuck her later, he was tired. "Wealthau made sure you found everything in order?" He grunted out, working through the breakfast meal while staring at a wide map of the galaxy marked with things he didn't care about. The stranger was on the opposite side, also working his way through bites of bread and meat and staring at various sheets of parchment and books, most of which Abram recognized as coming from Riser's own ledgers. The stranger? No, it was Robu, wasn't it? Can't call him a stranger if he's his new benefactor. Regardless, he nodded and gestured towards the second map, one of Raiza as a whole. Indeed, the practice of abduction concerned me for a time, I admit, but the supposed captives were quite insistent that they were happier up in towers than on the forested floor. Abram nodded. "Aye, beastmen are fucking savages in all the ways you might expect. Fun to slaughter, but if they ever get the best of you, they tend to follow through with a bout of rape, eating, killing, and sacrificing. Not usually in any particular order or with any particular discrimination either." He paused for a moment, narrowing his brows in consideration. "So, wait a moment. When you said you went to interview him, that's what you actually meant?" The pointy-eared gal behind him unleashed a suppressed shudder. King Reboot blinked, looking up from the map and furrowing his brow. "Yes, I strive for honesty when possible. What did you?" His face twisted into one of slight revulsion. No." Abram swallowed the chunk of lamb and replied, "You won't find me disagreeing. I don't see what the goat fuckers see myself." "You want me to tell the fuckers to stop?" The king gave a sigh of frustration. "If the situation was less ambiguous, perhaps, I would normally seek to universally punish abductions such as these, but that their captors seem to treat such captives more favorably than their native populations do. It's not a situation I expected to come across. I shall have to draft an addendum to the Codex Administratum pertaining to captured civilians and see about what to do with the beastmen of Ryasa once the forests are cleared." Abram snorted and gulped down some of his wine. "2 things. Pertaining to the beastmen, just slaughter them and be done with it. They can't be an issue then. On the second matter, I wish you luck clearing out the Wilderwood. None of us ever managed to." King Reboot spun the quill around in his hands and stared straight at him, one brow raised. "Your people have attempted to clear the Wilderwood? Tell me of the attempts." Abram groaned and called out, "Slave girl, go get the Wilderwood records." "Yes, my lord." In the distance, he could hear Wealthau shouting out, "Servants. They are not slaves, you ogre-headed brute." he growled out before pushing up off the table and shouting over the half-drunk men and women. "Listen up, you fucks. From now on, the Queen's official title is Cunt." There was much nervous laughter at that. They apparently didn't know he wasn't joking. Gently, a book was set down at his table, bringing him back towards the present. Idly, he smacked slave girl's ass, which made her yelp and jump, and opened the book with deliberate motions of his artificial fingers. Reaching the correct page in a weighty book that he was forced to memorize was a pain in the ass. Being king was a pain in the ass. Eventually, he reached the correct section and refreshed his memory on the doomed affairs. 29.9.25. The King Corlund orders the burning of the Wilderwoods to clear lands and expand from the mountain cities. The initial campaign is an extreme success, despite the constant attacks from the beastmen. The forest grows back too quickly to expand further. The extension to the mountain cities is overrun by a horde of 10,000 beastmen in 2 years. Most in the extension are raped, killed, and eaten. The forest recovers enough to destroy the original settlement entirely within 3 years after it is overrun. Looking up from the book with a flat expression, there are about 1,000 entries identical to this. That was merely the most recent. Forest burned and settlement founded in 1 year, overrun by beastmen within 5 years, utterly destroyed by the forest within 5 more years. It's common wisdom that the only way to expand is building up or tunneling down. The Wilderwood does not tolerate invasion. King Roboute frowns in consideration before extending a large hand, asking silently to see the tome. Handing it over, Abram gets back to his breakfast as the giant man reads through ancient histories. You're correct. The pattern is remarkably consistent. This speaks to deeper powers at work. Roboute rumbled out, flipping through the pages. Abram grunted in dismissive amusement. Witchcraft now? There hasn't been a sorcerer born on Riza in a dozen ages, and the beastmen shamans have no power. Oh, Roboute sounded curious. What makes you so certain? Jabbing a fork in his direction, Abram growled out. I'm the best damn murderer Riza has ever produced. I've killed more beastmen during my life than the last dozen kings did throughout their reigns. In all that time, I have not once seen a supposed shaman do anything other than wail as I murder it. Saying they wield magics is a way for shitty night pilots to excuse shit performance. Roboute stared at him for a moment, nodding in confirmation. Because you are a blank. He spoke with utter conviction, enough that Abram slowed in his chewing for a moment to look at him. Swallowing, he replied, The fuck is a blank? If this was an insult, he'd deck the fucker, no matter how big he was. A rare, natural condition related to the soul. Normal souls exude a positive psionic field, no matter how weak or strong. Blank souls exude a negative psionic field. He sounded clinical as he spoke of matters of the soul. Abram was focused entirely on the words, ignoring slave girl refilling his wine for entirely too long and the sudden quiet in the feast hall. Roboute continued to speak. This negative field weakens warp influence in proximity, the direct bane to witches and sorcerers of all manner, and renders the blank all but immune to their spells. Taking a strategic sip of wine, Roboute paused to let Abram process that before continuing. Unfortunately, this negative field is distinctly unnerving to non-blank souls, causing irrational fear and distrust without cause. In the most extreme cases, this even extends to causing physical pain. Most blanks do not live past childhood. Those that do usually have at least one blank parent, as the trait is inheritable. He didn't remember his mother. He was standing, glaring with a clenched fist and grinding teeth. He was angry. He wasn't sure at what yet. The feast hall was silent. How the fuck do you know this? He growled. Roboute nodded to the woman behind him with the long, pointy ears. She had a clenched fist and narrowed brows. Miriel, my attendant, is one of the eldar, natural psychers. He turned a flat look to Abram. Your anger causes her physical pain. I'm going to ask that you calm yourself. He kept his glare up for a moment before forcing himself to calm, breathing deeply and sitting down once more. Eyes closed, he counted to 10 before opening them and chugging his wine. Smashing the cup down on the table, warping the metal with his strength, he growled out again. Mentioning your sharp-eared woman reminds me. We have one of those in the undervault. Mind taking it off our hands? What? Moving down the immense stone stairs into the undervault, he growled out. Racer is on the edge of the galaxy. Most of the time, what lands here is unremarkable, comets and glass. On occasions, things rain down here from beyond that we don't understand. The solution is simple. He pushed open the thick metal doors that led to the next chamber and the next set of stairs. We lock it away. Don't touch anything down here. Most of it has foreign spells on it. He stepped across the clearly marked path, ignoring the many glinting things in the shadows of this room. Much of it took the form of expensive metals and shiny glass. None of it was worth touching. Many worlds have similar places, King Reboot commented, also careful to ignore the whispers of things in the vault, flanked by the two eldar he had already met, Miriel and Celebrim apparently. Not so many have eldar locked under their keeps. The tone was not quite accusatory. She landed in the year of haunted worlds. Abram growled out an explanation. By standard date, that was. He thought about it for a moment, converting the timeline of his world into the standard Reboot had provided. Ryza was founded sometime around 16,500, and this was thousands of years after, sometime in the 25th millennium, right before the time of troubles. She's been here for 5,000 years. Reboot replied with a hint of something in his voice. Abram nodded and continued. Before the Beastmen and the Wilderwood grew, in fact. Those came about to their current state 1,500 years after. The worst we had were the Golem Wars. Then the time of trouble starts, and almost everyone on Ryasa starts turning into beastmen, and the forest starts devouring our cities. Before all that, though, the Baron and his knights went down to where common folk claimed they saw a star touch down. They came back with a stasis pod, and a giant woman inside. She's been in the deepest levels ever since. I see. So if you wouldn't mind taking her off my hands. Abram grunted out. I'm tired of having to flog knights because they wanted to sneak down here and sing bad poetry to her. This was met with chuckles. He ignored them and pushed open the next layer of doors. This one was made out of the same stone golem heart that the walls of the keep above was. The seal on the door cracked a hair. At once the eldar staggered back, clutching at themselves for some reason. He raised a brow before pushing open the doors completely and stepping in. Inside was an immense chamber with a light inside, a luminous casket of sorts which shone like a gentle sun and filled the last chamber with enough light to imagine it was day, despite being thousands of feet below the surface at this point. The walls of the chamber were originally recorded as being made of carved stone, but that was no longer true, as thick roots extended from the water that covered the chamber floor and all the way up to serve as natural struts of support. The water, too, was not native to this place. The casket had produced it over the years, crystal clear, but filled with fine grain and fertile soils. Inside the casket, visible through the transparent lens that served as the lid, was a woman. The most ancient records called her the Queen of Life. He called her a pain to keep knights away from. Perhaps 9 or 10 feet tall, slender of limb and fair of hair, with delicate and gracefully pointed ears, dressed in a thin white garment. Her dress went on to serve as the inspiration for most of Ryza's own dresses, because originality was lost on his people. The casket was completely foreign in design, alien to look at. He narrowed his eyes as he considered it again. The casket was composed of graceful flowing bone, or what looked like it at least. The occasional jewel set into the form and shining with light that dimmed as he approached it. He refused to get any closer to the thing. That would get his boots wet. Turning, he pointed at the casket with his thumb and spoke out. There she is. Do you need help hauling her out? He grunted at seeing their stunned looks. Arms crossed, he leaned against the walls of the chamber as they observed the woman and her prison. There is a powerful sorcery woven around the capsule. Celebrim muttered out, trailing a hand across the surface. It feeds on my touch to empower itself. I do not think 1,000 warlocks would be able to break this seal. It's a masterful creation. No raw power can avail you over it. No amount of power, then? King Reboot muttered out, considering the matter with a hand on his chin. He turned to Abram and called out, King Abram, would you mind approaching the container? You asked me to get my boots wet, he growled out. Reboot nodded, a smile on his face. Abram grunted out and did as requested, wading through the shallow water and cave mud. He slowed when he noticed the light about the casket dim. He almost hesitated before letting his glower reassert itself and pushing forwards once more. Each step brought the light to further dimness. The chamber was nearly extinguished of light by the time he reached the side of the casket. He swallowed. Reboot and Celebrim stared at him. The eldar brought his hand up to rest upon the casket, helmet jilting in consideration. Please, King of Reza, lay a hand upon the seal and focus on undoing it. I can do the rest. I didn't think you were going to awaken the slumbering queen. He growled out in frustration, but cautiously placed a hand on the casket regardless. Just make sure she gets off my planet after. Focus on undoing what? How the fuck does one even do that? Bringing him down here to touch some alien relic and focus on undoing it. What he wanted was for this fucking affair to be over with, so he could fuck off and get back to making slave girls squirm. He let his mental tirade continue for some time. It was cut off by a sudden crack and hiss. Jolting back suddenly, he readied himself to attack. The transparent lid faded from existence, carried off by sparks of light rapidly dying in the atmosphere of the thin cave. He swallowed slowly as the magnitude of the event slowly dawned on him. He promptly strangled whatever awe he was about to feel and resolved to murder the sleeping beauty if she made a wrong move. Her body shifted. The eldar staggered back. Robut flinched, foot siding against the muddy floor. He was frozen, unable to turn his head away as the giant eldar woman slowly shifted in her bed of bone. The cavern was filled with straining light once more, flickering against his shadows. The woman pushed herself up, a halo of pale blue gemstones slowly forming out of collected drops of dew previously unseen. Slowly, her eyes opened to reveal gemstones of purest sapphire, shining like stars reflecting in the sea. She took a shuddering breath, then exhaled and wearily looked about her chamber bed. Eyes rising, they locked onto his own. Her face shifted into one of motherly sorrow. She spoke. He did not understand the language. It was beautiful, it was sorrowful, it was alien. Oh dear child. Hands extended forwards and cupped his face, a thumb rubbed against his cheek. She pulled him in, and he strained against limbs that didn't seem this strong before. Near-born babe, void-song son whither, has thine kin departed? Away, away. He struggled for a moment, sending a furious and desperate glare towards Robut, who was just getting his bearings back. He was trapped in the arms of a witch. The situation was an emergency. The Air Queen shall embrace thee for a time, in hopes to bring comfort to thy twisted spirit. Eventually, she turned her gaze upwards and noticed the others in the chamber. The giant woman smiled gently, and one hand brushed against his blood-red locks. He renewed his struggle to be free of her beast-like grip. Ah, mine own kin and kith, greet me. A most pleasant awakening I've been blessed with. Please speak to me. How long have I slumbered? How goes our struggles against the Mon Key? Does the capital still stand? They did not move to free him from this monster's grasp, proving that they were traitors and fiends of the highest order. Instead, they began a stuttering conversation. He would gain revenge one day, preferably as soon as he was free. Left fist, right fist, left fist, right fist. Punch, 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 punch. The steel plate slowly began to dent under the weight of her steady blows, even as her knuckles began to develop tiny scratches and cuts. It hurt, but not to any worrying extent, just enough to keep her mind off things for a bit. Her father led a battle to destroy a world. That was pretty impressive, but with all the guns and men he has at his command, she wasn't too surprised by that. The gang with more guns and more men usually could do whatever they want, and killing a planet sounds about right from the ridiculously large numbers she remembered from the Force breakdowns. Her gang back on Thanoia had a couple hundred. Her new gang had 100,000. Lunar Wolves. Apparently they got the name from some people they killed back on Terra's moon, Luna. It was a pretty preem name, she liked it. When she had reached 10 full maturity apparently, Father introduced her to her legion. The half of them that were actually here, that was. One of 20 such legions. One for each of her sisters out there in the galaxy. He didn't introduce her to them before because first impressions are important, he declared in a booming voice. Her legion had about 100,000 men in total in it, and 50,000 of them were here on this frack-huge void ship. Well, about 46,000 of them now, actually. Left fist, right fist, left fist, right fist. How the frack was she supposed to remember that many names? This was grok shit. She ignored the fact that she remembered everything she learned, and focused on the fact that it was a very large number of people who apparently shared her genes. Shared her genes? And she was expected to lead them in Father's name. A ganger from the labyrinths, leading an intergalactic army of superhumans. She knew what she was good at. getting in and smashing heads for the boss. Stuff this big? Sure. She was getting training to learn how to lead armies like this, all that boring organizational stuff. The custodians were pretty dedicated to making sure they learned everything they would need to know and more. And she had been learning a lot, making sure to study hard, setting a good example for her cute little sisters. But it still felt too much, like her feet were suspended off the ground, but a whole bunch of weight was on her shoulders. She was just thankful she wasn't required to lead her new gang just yet, although maybe if she had been there, left fist, right fist, left fist, right fist, she used to have a legion master, a real vet of this war business, who kept her gang in shape while she was still growing. Man named Skull, who chuckled whenever someone brought that up and liked collecting beast teeth. He and about 4,000 others got curbed down on Barbarous against things she didn't even know where to begin preparing to fight. Her fist crashed through the plate of steel, breaking her out of her thoughts. She blinked, realizing what had just happened. She tugged, before wincing as the now sharp bits of metal dug right into the flesh of her arm like a hook. She grunted and stared at her predicament, now slowly realizing that her hands and arms were in fairly substantial amounts of pain. Looking down, she saw that she was dripping enough red to make a puddle on the ground. Her knuckles were cracked open, her forearms torn, and shoulders sore. "Huh," she commented intelligently. Of course, this was the exact moment her grumpiest sister walked into the training chambers, black-haired, brown-eyed, and almost never without a judgmental expression on her face. Athena, with hair tied back, wearing short, loose clothes suitable for exercise, and carrying a dutiful bag of miscellaneous exercise items, stopped at the doorway and stared at her. One of the 3 primarchs, mature enough to have met their legions so far. Hathor, eldest primarch, stared back with a carefully blank face and arms drenched in her own blood. Raising an imperious brow, she made sure to enunciate carefully as she greeted her sister. "Athena, how are you?" Athena stared for a moment, slowly moving her gaze to the arm, then to her. Hathor's face remained carefully blank, composed in the way a proper warlord should, as the custodians had taught them. Athena was silent, reaching into her bag to pull out a basic set of wrappings and canteen, moving over to Hathor and carefully beginning to pry the sharp metal hooks away from flesh and allow for easy extraction. She could have done that herself, but Athena walked in at a most poor time. "Ah, you have my thanks." Hathor nodded, extracting the bloody limb from its temporary prison. "Wait," Athena grunted out, pouring the water over the limb and wiping it off with a hand towel. Hathor didn't bother flinching. The pain was incredibly minor at this point. "Not using biomancy?" Athena questioned, with another judgmental-sounding grumble. Hathor knew that's just how she sounded, though. Father had been teaching them psychery, space magic in practical terms. Darling Madonna had taken to it more than anyone else, with Fulgrim a close second. The rest of them didn't hold as much passion for the subject, most of it being a dry technical affair involving warp mechanics and paracausal resonances. Loffen was usually pretending to not be asleep during the lectures, only paying attention to sections involving identification and anti-psyker strategies. "I haven't figured out the restoration of flesh yet," Hathor admitted. "My focus was on removing fatigue first. I thought it would grant me more time if I didn't need to rest every few days. And it indeed had. She hasn't needed to sleep for a few weeks now, although she was slowly getting there, more and more weary of being awake all the time. She would need that time if she had any hope of keeping her first-place position." Athena grunted, which would sound like a dismissive gesture, but Hathor had quickly realized simply meant she accepted what she learned and had nothing she felt like contributing after, which naturally meant it was up to her to keep the conversation going. "How fares your legion? The Stormwalkers, correct? I heard they did well for themselves upon Barbarous," she asked, waiting politely for Athena to finish cleaning off her arms with the moist cloth. It was mostly a matter of scrubbing fresh blood from their limbs, their blood clotted enough to seal wounds in a few moments regardless. Athena nodded. Almost 1,000 dead, almost 10,000 heavily wounded. Many casualties were merely crippling and wounding. They were quick to amputate themselves whenever they suffered a wound. Most will survive to be fitted with prosthetics or interred in the Albia war coffins. Dauntless as always, Athena spoke of massive levels of dismemberment with ease. "I heard they were called dreadnoughts," she commented idly. "So have I. I am unconvinced by the name. They are not as durable as they should be for such a grand name. I'll be sure to tell Father that," she said with a smile. Athena shook her head. I have already looked at the design, spoken with their engineers. The issue is the legs, she trailed off before grunting. Albion engineers made the groin a T-bar connection. You can't fit any more weight without changing the entire lower body. She didn't know what that meant without referencing the designs. Engineering wasn't exactly something she was very interested in. Instead, she just hummed in tepid agreement. Athena noticed this and moved the topic. Regardless, I've already reviewed their performance and provided my thoughts to them. Mostly acceptable, nothing standing out as a glaring problem. The deaths were kept low through preemptive amputations against the rot, and from what I observed, metal was somewhat more resistant to the rot psychery than flesh was. They will do better next time. How? The question slipped out before she could censor herself. Athena glanced up at her eyes, and she quickly changed mental track. A proper warlord must be sure of herself, and all that. What strategy would you change? What can they do differently? Should she tell her men to amputate themselves preemptively now, trusting them to survive the rest of the battle without a limb? Nothing much, Athena replied. Her look of confusion must have shown on her face, because Athena continued. They will do better because they will have more experience, more training, and better equipment. They will do better because they will be stronger. Blinking for a moment to take that in, Hathor huffed in amusement. You make it sound so simple. It was always simple. They had little information on this foe, so they did poorly. They will have more information next time, so they will do better. The next time they meet an unknown foe, they will likely suffer similar levels of damage. Athena pulled her now red cloth away from Hathor's arms, now thoroughly cleaned off. Many will die, most will survive, and those that survive will be stronger. Dauntless, Athena. She smiled in bittersweet amusement. Just train more then, I suppose? Athena nodded. Your biomancy focus is a clever one. I didn't think of it. I will learn how to do that as soon as possible. I thought you were focused on Father's technomancy lessons. I was, and if I no longer need sleep, I will be able to learn them faster. The sound of boots in the hallway brought their attention. Turning to the doorway, Athena and Hathor saw them open to reveal the third sister old enough to have met her legion. Wheatish hair, blue eyes, and a small but ever-present grin on her face. Just like Athena and Hathor, her body was bound in lean muscle. Unlike her sisters, she wasn't wearing clothing for exercise. She was wearing her normal garb and holding a metal keg over her shoulder and 3 bows in her other hand. Slipping into the room and glancing behind her, Lofton closed the door gently and turned. Pausing only for a moment as she saw her too, Lofton quickly let the grin on her face grow much wider and waved her hand. Hey, look what I got. Hefting the metal keg high, Lofton shook it around slightly to let the sound of liquid slosh around inside. Is that alcohol? I thought the custodians forbid us from drinking until we returned to Terra, Hathor commented. Alcohol won't affect us regardless. Athena dryly pointed out. Lofton sauntered over, propping down on the ground in front of them, giving the puddle of blood a brief glance before dismissing it and rapidly patching the metal flooring. Amused, Hathor lowered herself down to sit on the floor, looking over to see Athena do the same. You're right, the nannies don't want us drinking, but Pops didn't say a thing about it. Lofton waved her hand in a circle, giving an innocent expression. So, erring on the side of caution, I elected to not inform any who might be upset at this. More importantly, this isn't alcohol. It's miod. Miod? Athena commented, as Lofton poured the bowls full of a substance that certainly looked like alcohol. Drink from home, I taught my boys how to make it as a reward for doing so well. They only lost a few hundred. Lofton beamed with pride as she handed the bowls out to her sisters. VI Legion, right? Hathor spoke to confirm something. I need to rename them. It's a pretty boring name right now. Lofton mused aloud. Space Bears, maybe? VI Legion only has a few thousand warriors. You said you lost a few hundred. Almost certainly catastrophic losses then, in terms of overall percentage. They went down swinging, Lofton grinned, revealing sharp teeth. I watched the recordings from their helmets. You should watch them with me later. My boys charging, their war cries, just the right pitch, and going right for the biggest bastards they could find. Every one of them got a warrior's death down there. Couldn't be prouder. Hathor stared down at the bowl for a moment, filled with the honey-coloured liquid. You don't sound too worried about all the ones that died. Lofton paused the moment before taking her own drink, and let her head wobble back and forth a bit. Hey, nothing to do about it. When you fight, you just got to accept that some of your warriors are going to die. Best you can do is end the fight, all quick and decisive like. Pop said that this world needed to burn, and he knows more about this space war business than me, so I'll trust his judgment on it. Lofton took her first long drink, sighing in contentment before continuing. My boys went down there and fought bravely, and the ones that died went down with weapons in hand and honor intact. That's all I could reasonably ask them to do. She grinned and thrust her bowl out, liquid sloshing almost to the point of spilling. So if you feel like feeling bad over them, do me a favor and drink up instead, so we can get to the part where I boast on their behalf for a few hours. I just came from drinking my officers under the table, and I feel like an actual challenge now. Hathor smiled and shook her head, lifting the bowl up to her lips and gulping. Immediately she began to cough, because the drink burned going down, and that hasn't ever happened before. It tasted vaguely like cherries, but mostly just poison. Athena pounded her chest with her fist, also recovering from her bow. What the? How did you make this? She had quickly corrected her initial question. Lofton scratched at her cheek for a moment, considering the question. Well, normally you use a certain root on Fenris. They didn't have any of those here, so I had to improvise a few of the ingredients. I used those pink flower things one of the nannies told us about a few days back. One of those pink flowers. Hathor's face scrunched up. Athena beat her to the punch with the realization. The 7-petal pink jungle flowers of High Brazil. Yeah, those things. We had some on the ship in some lockbox somewhere. I took them to make the Miodot. Made it kind of fruity, though. Not a bad taste. Those are used to make highly lethal contact poison, Hathor commented dryly. Lofton looked at her, down at where her hands were currently refilling her bow, then back up again. Slowly finishing the pour and setting the keg down again, she took a long sip of her Miod bowl with a blank expression. Smacking her lips for a moment, Lofton hummed, "Needs more kick." Hathor couldn't contain her laughter. Athena cracked a small smile. Both finished their bowls, holding them up for refills. Several drinks later, Hathor furrowed her brow and realized something. Wait, you said you made this as a victory drink for your legion. Aye up, Lofton confirmed. Alcohol takes time to ferment. Does Miod not? Athena finished the thought, also bringing her brow to furrow. Lofton waved a dismissive hand. Ah, you know that fancy magic nonsense Pops is teaching us about? Well, most of it was pretty pointless. Why shoot a thunderbolt when you have a gun and all that? But I did get at least one trick down. Ah, you learned how to make things ferment faster? Hathor concluded, bemused by the thought. Lofton snorted in a smug manner. Turns out that biomancy stuff is good for at least one thing. You use the power of your soul to make beverages, Athena commented dryly. Nothing more useful than that? Just the beverage. Hey now, good brew is always useful. Lofton defended herself, pointing a bow. It's better than what Madonna uses it for, at least. Madonna uses biomancy? She hasn't boasted about her mastery in it yet. Hathor questioned, bringing the bowl up to her lips and drinking. She uses it all the time. She just tries to hide it, Lofton replied, raising a hand up and making it curve in front of her chest. She uses it to make herself bigger. Hathor sprayed out a mouthful of Mao Ode and began to violently cough, much to Lofton's amusement, estimated by her immediate uproarious laughter. Athena grunted in a judgmental fashion, taking a sip of her own bowl and not commenting on her sister's habits. And so the evening went on in that manner, the three sisters sharing a keg of a beverage their caretakers would probably be upset at them having, and Hathor did her best to ignore the lingering thoughts of the first battle of her legion she had yet witnessed. Eventually, at some point, she asked Lofton a similar question to what she asked Athena. How would you prepare your legion to do better, against a thing like Barbarous, against enemies like that? Lofton had pondered the question for a moment before replying simply, Pop said sorcerers caused it right. Just kill them before they can.